Okay, so I think we can start formally, and I hope people will continue joining me. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining me, and thanks very much for the panelists to join this session. And this Industry 4.0 is becoming a huge topic. And this is the reason that there are two separate bodies. Both of them are very active in research. One is the Research Methods Committee of AOM IM Division, and second is newly formed Special Interest Group at AIB, Special Interest Group on Digitalization. And both of them have jointly organized this webinar, which is talking about both theoretical issues and methodological issues about Industry 4.0. The purpose of this webinar is to provide a deeper understanding of members of AIB and AOM IM division about this new phenomena and how this can affect our research and what are some new research areas in which we can make progress. And we are very much fortunate to have a very distinguished panel, and thanks Jung and Liang who are co-organizers to assemble this panel. And thanks very much to all the panelists to join us for this. So without further delay, I will shift it to Jung. Jung will be our moderator. She recently joined AOM IM Division Research Methods Committee. She has been an active researcher and an assistant professor at UIUC. So Jung, please, you can take it over and we can start. I just want to make one thing here. This is not a webinar, so this is a meeting, which means all of us can participate. But just to keep discussion on track, if you have any questions, please write it in the chat box. You can write it anytime. I will be collecting all those questions, and after the moderated panel discussion is over, we will have a Q&A session. But instead of anyone unmuting themselves and speaking, I will give those questions to Jung, and Jung will ask those questions to panelists on the behalf of all of us. So whenever you have any questions, please feel free to write them on the chat box, and Jung will be asking questions on your behalf. So thanks very much for joining once again, and I will hand over to Jung. Jung, please.
Okay, thank you, Noman. So let me share my screen first. So do you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so before starting our conversation today, I'd like to briefly talk about the overview of the webinar today. So there has been growing attention to the fourth industry revolution among researchers, and it has been several years since the emergence of the concept. And there has been a surge of journal and conference submissions lately around this topic. So although there are lots of opportunities for research around this topic, but management scholars, and especially IB scholars, often find small and large challenges in conducting research in this area. So we wanted to extend the scholarly conversation to improve our understanding of Industry 4.0 and figure out the existing and uncovered opportunities and challenges. So Noman mentioned briefly about the purpose of the webinar today, but specifically, we aim to discuss the need for extending current theories and developing new theories and publication strategies for scholars, and figuring out any databases or methodological improvement available for empirical research, and providing important insights about upcoming JIBS Special Issue on Industry 4.0. And we have wonderful panelists today who are great experts around this topic in international business and strategy. So we have Dana from King's College of London, and Satish from Case Western Reserve University, and Deepak from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and Shaheer from the University of Minnesota. I greatly thank our panelists all for their very kind willingness to share their insights of our research in Industry 4.0. So the basic format of our webinar today is Q&A, as Noman already mentioned. So there are several questions we already shared with our panelists. So during the webinar, I will ask each question, and panelists can feel free to answer any questions they would like to answer, not required to answer all questions. And there is no specific order of the answering among the panelists. So this discussion will be around the 40 or the 45 minutes. And after this, we'll have the time to discuss the questions that our audience share. So please share your questions in our chat box. Okay, so let me start with our very first question. I would like to first ask about the definition of the concept of Industry 4.0. Of course, it has been discussed a lot, and but this is a somewhat broad, and some people feel like it is not super crystal clear. So I would like to ask our panelists to share their own thoughts about the definition. So what is Industry 4.0, and how is it related to other concepts like digital transformation, digitalization, and other related concepts? And why is it important?
Okay. May I get started?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Jung, and good to see everyone. I'm Shaheer Zahra from the University of Minnesota. So Industry 4.0 is a stage in the evolution of organizations and the way we think of industry. The first stage, that's Industry 1.0, was back in the 1700s in the Industrial Revolution in the UK, that kind of spread throughout the world and transformed the world. Later came the mass production and the Ford Motor Company, that also became a new way of organizing manufacturing and industry and so on. And later in the 1960s, we had the beginning of the digital revolution, that now we're all benefiting from that. So Industry 4.0 is the culmination of that. This is supposed to be the integration of the new technology, especially digital technology, through manufacturing. That was the initial intent for smart manufacturing, virtualization, connectivity, all of these things, automation. But one of the key things about it is the interaction, increased interaction between humans and machines, smart machines becoming part and parcel of what we do and how we organize the workplace, if you will. I'm going to briefly, I know the other people here have written a lot about this, so I'm going to leave the space for them, but it is related to digitalization, because digitalization is at the core of that, correct? And if you really go on to engage in massive scale in terms of Industry 4.0, you really have to go through massive transformation in terms of the organization, in terms of the goals, in terms of how we structure the production and operations processes. The whole production has become kind of outdated nowadays. We don't use it as much as we used to when I was an assistant professor many years ago. Anyway, it's the smartness, the interaction, the intellect, intelligent machines that are become part of this transformation. Is not only organizational, but strategic in terms of envisioning what the organization is all about and what the industry is all about, and envisioning things we don't even know. And I see ChatGPT and AI are part of this big transformation. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Shaheer. So anyone? Yeah, Dana.
Shall I go next? Okay, thank you so much. And thank you very much for organizing this interesting conversation. I'm Minbaeva, I'm at King's College London. And thank you very much, Shaheer, to frame the conversation already at this stage so precisely. Very much agree with your positioning. It's integration of the digital technologies into industry, and as you say, also very much in manufacturing. But with this came lots of other questions, and in my field, or the area that I work with, this integration brought lots of interesting questions, and all of them could be clustered somewhere on the interface, in the sense that everything we know, research or do in management is kind of based on the assumption of managerial practices, governance structures affecting individual behaviors, groups, collectives, etc. However, now with that integration of digital technology that Shaheer pointed out, we have to perhaps, I don't want to say stop, but let's say stop, just for the provocation. Stop focusing on individuals alone and start focusing on the interfaces between individuals, or i.e. human capital and technology. And there are lots of things are happening at that interface, and there are lots of issues that needs to be not just revisited, but completely rethought, simply because some of the basic assumptions that we had in our managerial series are no longer there. I work with several organizations going through the strategic transformation, mainly brought by the digitalization of business processes, and there are lots of issues, there are lots of unanswered questions. The biggest challenge, I presume, right now, as we see from companies, small complex organizations, but also very much multinationals, how to accommodate that logic of continue doing what you're doing, in fact, improving it, right? So going from good to great, efficiency, effectiveness, and at the same time, start thinking or doing things qualitatively different, right? So something around this information enriched customer solutions that, search for the new business model and completely different solutions. And organizations and companies, they cannot just do either or, they have to do both and that's why 75% of strategic transformations fail, and that's the reported figures, right? I think there are many more organizations that struggle with the challenges of strategic transformation. So I think there is plenty of things for us to discuss in here. I do believe that there are lots of unanswered questions on that interface between human and technology, definitely from the managerial scholars, but also from all other different fields. So looking forward for the conversation. Thank you.
So I'm curious what Satish has to say. So he's done a lot of work in this space. I'll follow you, Satish, if that's okay.
All right. Thank you. So first of all, I want to thank Jung, Noman, and Liang for organizing this. I think it's a really great opportunity to share ideas. And I will just, Shaheer sort of gave a very brief intro to. So in my view, I think, the question was, is Industry 4.0 is a buzzword or not? I think it became as a buzzword because it got introduced or sort of became more popular during the World Economic Forum in the mid-2010s. But I see that as a more of a set of new capabilities that have emerged in the past 10 years. And so at least 5 capabilities. So one is intelligence, which we see in every part of our business. Second is automation, not just in the manufacturing, but even in customer service, so automation. Third is cyber physical connectivity. So connectivity between machines, physical machines like machinery on the shop floor and digital networks and systems. Fourth is human-machine collaboration. So that is between people and digital devices or digital machines. And the fifth is decentralization. Decentralization in terms of pushing decisions to the edge of your network or in resources gathering. So I think these 5 capabilities are very important, and we need to focus on those capabilities rather than just technologies, because the technologies like Internet of Things, sensors, these are all technologies that enable these capabilities, but tomorrow there might be a new technology that might come up. So I view Industry 4.0 as more of helping to set the context for us to understand how these capabilities may transform MNEs and their operations and the relationships in the global arena. So I'm going to stop there, but I think that's what, for me, that's what Industry 4.0 is.
Thank you, Satish. Thank you all for being here, and thank you especially to the organizers for inviting us to join this very important topic, very interesting topic. I think the setup from everyone has been great. I think Satish's comments at the end sort of lead me to perhaps make 2 points that are, I think, meaningful and important. The first, building on the comments that people have already made, there's a lively debate in industry about, is it Industry 3.0 continuing, or is it really something new that we need to give it a separate name, right? And in some ways, Industry 3.0, which is primarily the IT revolution that happened, starting with semiconductors and the ongoing evolution of Moore's law, that was something that lends itself to the technologies that we're seeing coming today. But I think the big difference that we've seen between, let's say, the 80s and the 90s and what we're seeing happening today is something that Satish referred to at the very end, and I think the other speakers also referred to, which is the significant change in organization and structure, right? So you can imagine the Industry 3.0 industrial revolution as occurring within a industrial or Chandlerian architecture, for lack of a better word, but it was a new technology within that architecture. And what we're seeing today is increasingly kind of a redesign of the architecture of firms, and I use that term very loosely, the architecture of industries and so on. So I think that's one thing that's worth taking away as a key point. The other, which reflects my own sort of lack of confidence about our understanding, is that this is something that a lot of folks are looking at the evolution and they're seeing something happening there, but it is an emergent phenomenon. So I think we should be careful about sort of recognizing that we don't know all the pieces yet, we don't know the ultimate impacts yet, and that's what makes it wonderful and interesting to study, is that you're actually sort of trying to make sense of an important development and change in the business world, in industries, and perhaps even beyond.
All right, thank you so much for all our panelists to share your great thoughts about various boundaries of the concept of Industry 4.0, which greatly improve our understanding of Industry 4.0. So here, I would like to share the next question based on this definition. So I think most of our audience today, they are here today because they really want to develop economy research in the area of Industry 4.0, or incorporate Industry 4.0 concept or the context into their research. So given that, I think one of the questions that we are wondering about is potential areas of research, specifically research questions. So I would like to ask our panelists, what are some major research questions that IB scholars can explore to better understand Industry 4.0?
So maybe I'll take the first punt at this and others can chime in. I should say, first of all, that I'm perhaps less of an IB scholar than some of the other folks here, and so I'm sure they'll have more nuance to add to this. But it seems to me pretty much all research questions in IB, and for that matter in strategy, are on the table. Really, the key thing is what do these new technologies and the new ways of organizing that might arise from them, where do they push the boundaries of our existing answers to classic research questions, right? So how does a firm internationalize? What is the theory of the multinational? What drives international M&As? What drives international JVs or alliances? What drives success in international competition? You can pretty much think about any research question that we have. And what is key is really sort of identifying the connection between the changes wrought by these new technologies and and where there is an opportunity to overturn existing understanding about the answers to those questions.
Have I tried? So very wonderful introduction. I think, again, all issues are on the table indeed, but I think a couple of things are especially noteworthy with all of the geopolitical shifts that are happening in place, and IB scholars have really been attentive to that. Access to the technology and the different types of technologies and redefining organizational boundaries and all of the things that come around that are really, really, really big issues. One of the questions that I always think about is the digital divide that seems to exist across countries. Will it become even more serious, especially with all of geopolitical, issues? And secondly, because of the pace of technological adoption is very different across countries, across industries, and across companies. I think Deepak was talking about the theories of the organization, especially in the multinational company. What gives the M&E an advantage in this new environment with all of the disruption that's taking place around in their core business and around their, the fringes of their businesses as well? How do you sustain advantage? What gives you an advantage? Technology itself, we know it could be an enabler, but it does not always bestow the advantage unless you use it strategically in creative and ways you're able to protect your intellectual property. So how can you do all of this in an environment that's supposed to be digitally connected and so on? Digital connectivity is a big, big issue. It's one of the things that Satish talked about and others talked about. For multinational company that brings a lot of goods, a lot of data, a lot of information, it almost can suffocate the decision making, but at the same time, it allows you to do and conceive different things. Finally, the information does not come for free because we have misinformation, disinformation, bad information also flowing. So how do you manage all of this in decision making? Again, who has access to the data, what types of data, and so on. And then I think rightly said this about different levels of the analysis. I think the questions we study of interest will vary quite a bit about the individual, about the groups, about the organization. And so there is a multitude of opportunities. I think we'll talk about the special issue. That's why we kind of thought that this would be a forum for different people from different places to come in and participate in the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Satish, is that okay if I go next?
Sure.
Just to put together a little bit, very much what Deepak said, that, everything is on the table. And I think, again, why is that so many things are back on the table? Well, again, one of the most basic assumptions that we have in the assumption of, time, task-based job description, permanent organizations, just these assumptions are out of the equation in here, right? And that's why so many things will have to be not just revisited, but rethought. And then again, as Shaheer was saying, the benefits of this rethinking are not equally distributed. We saw it during COVID, where all those benefits of virtuality and flexibility were definitely not equally distributed across the countries. I think in a sense also perhaps to throw in some additional aspects in here, there are certain things, I guess, that multinationals, because of the nature of their human capital, are equipped to do better than domestic firms, right? So we've been dealing with the issue of not collocation or issues of time, including permanent boundaries for so long. So what is that we as a international management, international business scholars already know now and could contribute to the conversation? But in a broader conversation, I would say, but maybe also something that we could discuss, my particular interest, as perhaps many of you are curious about as well, is in the this topic around AI and management. And there are plenty of special issues that were announced recently, and there will be one more coming up in the future, in the near future, the Academy of Management review. What is AI's roles in management and organization within as well as across the levels? And there are plenty of things in there, things related to decision-making and problem-solving naturally, but even if you think about work roles, employee skills, managerial practices, how does this emergence of different forms of AI change the nature of work, issues related to creativity, innovation, teams, communication, coordination, and not to forget things related to societal implications of AI. And again, for multinationals or for international business, these questions are perhaps even more interesting. So these are some of the things that keep me awake at night, at least. Satish.
Thank you. So I think, all of you have I'll just build on this. I think that's what we tried to frame in that special issue call for papers too, that if you want to, you can think about 3 buckets. One is strategic aspects. The other is behavioral, which Dana just mentioned. And the third is the societal impact, which, Shaka referred to briefly. I think most of our research, at least what we have seen in IB in the digitalization part, has been focused more on the strategic aspects like global value chains, connectivity of M&Es with the subsidiaries and those kinds of issues, and less so on the behavioral and the societal impacts. And so there is more, I would say there is more potential to contribute to in that behavioral and societal impact. So in the behavioral, like Dana was mentioning, the whole broad area of future of work, and what is the M&E's way of shaping that. I think M&Es have a much more impact on that than domestic companies. So that is one very important one. And also, when it comes to data, M&Es, the individual level customers, privacy, security, those are issues which are becoming very dominant, especially when AI comes into the picture. So again, questions related to the well-being of individual well-being, both in the employee and the employee worker and the customer. I think both are very important. And then at group and like what Dana was mentioning, at group and organization levels, there are other issues that come up. At the societal level, there are positives and negatives. I think Shaka mentioned about the distribution of the value, the benefits have not been equitable. I think that's one important part of it. So there are lots of issues related to the sustainability of the solutions and products and services, and how digital technology can be a part of that solution. I also want to mention 2 important contexts for examining these issues. One is, which Shaka briefly referred to, which is the more fragmented geopolitical world that we live in, and how, so on the one hand, we say that we are all connected digitally, but there are barriers coming up in application of the same technologies. So how do these solutions scale? I think that's a very important question. The second context is something which we sort of identified in the call for papers, is that more of the focus of the IB research has been on the global north and less so on the global south. But if you look at it, many of these technologies the implementation is more extensive in global south. And so there are opportunities to inform on how some of these issues, sort of span out in the global south. And I think that has not been at least evident in the literature so far. So that is another potential. I think these 2 contextual conditions are also very, very interesting, at least from my perspective.
Do you mind if I add just one more thing on that to our discussion? I think we all recognize it, but we need to articulate it, I guess. The organization, the concept of the organization, how to organize for this massive transformation, and how you create advantage again. Because one of the things that happens with the digital connectivity, you're plugged into a global network, but also so co-creation happens, and the distributed competencies and all of the stuff we write about. So what does it mean for the organization, and how we organize and how we embed those capabilities that Satish was talking about earlier within the organization? Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for sharing all your thoughts about the untapped areas that we can exploit or incorporate into our existing understanding of multinational studies and the definition of organization, or the perspective from the organization. So it is really good that we at least understand the general direction of untapped areas or the research questions. Then I would like to specifically talk a little bit more about this question. So given these general the research questions or direction of the research questions, when writing our research papers, then definitely one of the things we think about is more about the theory, I think, and either exploiting the existing theories or developing a completely new theories. As we already just discussed a little bit, this context of Industry 4.0 might challenge some of our existing understandings, right? So given that, I'd like to ask, which of the existing theories are likely to be the most relevant for Industry 4.0? And where do you think are the most promising areas for expanding existing theories or developing completely new theoretical frameworks?
I can take a stab at that, and hopefully others will chime in and make better points as we go along. So it seems to me that the way we think about theory, and that's, I think, an important starting point. The way we think about theory in strategy, in international business, in many ways is one step removed from sort of what you might think of as core theories, right? It's sort of it's theory that emerges from sociology or from economics, but that's applied then to, or even psychology, but then that's applied to a certain context or a certain set of research questions. So, of course, in doing so, we create a bespoke kind of theory that applies to our context, right? So if you think about almost all of our theories, it's sort of, it has that character to it. So it seems that they're, especially as a researcher, perhaps the most meaningful approach is to ask whether a research question that we're studying sort of can very easily be explained by existing theory, or whether there's something happening in the context of Industry 4.0 that's pushing the boundaries of existing theory, right? So, and that some of that insight might come from the base discipline, right? So you might be able to actually draw on people who are studying, I'm just going to throw out some examples, studying network effects, for example, right? Or studying two-sided markets. And, that can then inform what does it mean to be competing in a platform ecosystem type way, whether that's in strategy or whether that's in international business, right? And then that sort of then begins to maybe alter some existing understandings of what is the role of the multinational, for example. Maybe it pushes the boundaries of what is the value of internalization, right? Which is kind of a significant sort of theory in understanding the multinational firm. And I think it's in pushing those boundary conditions where the bigger opportunities lie. But I don't want to discourage people from doing work that involves the application of existing theory to digital phenomena. It might be that a lot of digital phenomena actually can be explained very well by existing theory, and it's done well. I think there's a contribution there as well. I'll pause there.
I think that's very valuable indeed. And thank you very much for formulating this question. When I was thinking about it in preparation, like Deepak, I also thought about this. It's not about tight jacket of a theory, right? So that's, you already voiced it. So let me pick up where Deepak stopped. So I have at least three things. Let's put that theoretical frameworks that I found myself going back to and using more and more when I work with strategic transformation, be that in a research paper, classroom, or exec ed session. And the first one, surprisingly, and I thought I kind of departed from that literature for good, it's on the knowledge transfer and knowledge sharing. I certainly, when we talked about technologies, particularly big data analytics, use of evidence-based decisions, all these things, found myself going back to some of those models that I did 20 years ago, where there was a knowledge sender, there was this, message being knowledge in itself with all these characteristics, there was knowledge receiver, and there was this organizational environment, and there was those barriers associated with these elements of knowledge transfer being absorptive capacity, disseminative capacity, as well as organizational learning. And I found myself kind of going back and start using these concepts more and more, because in a sense, also, like, for example, again, in my area of research, we now talk a lot around global virtual teams, right? And then there is suddenly an interface between a leader and a follower, plus time zones, country, culture, institutional differences. So we kind of need to almost revisit perhaps the logic of this exchange of information and knowledge with a new player, right? Because it's definitely about my disseminative capacity as a sender, but at the same time, on the other hand, say, for example, I'm a leader, my followers should have a very different absorptive capacity to be able to function within the global virtual team. And as for the organizational learning environment, that's something that's studied for long. And suddenly, there is a completely new player called an interface, a computer. A second literature that I've been kind of revisiting gladly, because I think that's really true theory. It's a dynamic capabilities approach. So, for example, talking around the managing strategic transformation, say, for example, in the classrooms or in the exec ed sessions, I would often refer to, to things, to the links, sorry, that's not the one, to the links around, say, for example, strategy, capabilities, and people, right? So someone before mentioned things around, with the arrival of Industry 4.0, now the whole focus on the customers, and we need to create new, very often digital capabilities. And when I'm trying to explain and work through this model, the whole sensing, sensing, seeing, and transforming logic comes in, and it actually resonates very well with managers and executives when we discuss what is needed to create in order to enable their strategic transformation efforts. And the final thing, and that's the literature that I've been working with during the last several years, it's the whole strategic human capital literature. I think it's interesting because it's traditionally been looking at the complementarities between human capital and firm infrastructures, but suddenly that firm infrastructure is not just the usual governance structures, procedures, etc., but also digital one, right? So there's a whole new bulk of opportunities to going and studying, I guess, researching as well as perhaps in teaching, going and studying that interplay, that this is a source of finding the sources of complementarities, looking for the synergies, because it's not just any longer human capital and the firm's infrastructure. There are several new players in that field.
So, Shaka, you want to go, or you? All right. So let me just build on both of your ideas. I think I totally agree with what Deepak mentioned, that one of the opportunities, very promising opportunities, to see how do Industry 4.0 technologies and associated capabilities extend the boundary conditions or redefine the boundary conditions of existing theories. And I think just to take an example, blockchain-based DAOs, or decentralized autonomous organizations. Now, that is a fairly new concept, and we don't have enough data to really, there is a lot of companies that are trying to experiment with that, but I think it's going to come today or tomorrow. And a key issue would be the governance. And so how do existing theories related to M&E governance, how does that translate into a context where we have DAOs, right? So that is just one. The other example I can think about is scaling of new ventures, international new ventures. Again, Dana, you mentioned the digital infrastructure. I think lots of aspects which are unique to digital infrastructures make the scaling of international new ventures completely different. And so, again, does it make obsolete existing theories? The answer is no. But I think there are opportunities to refine them, to rethink some of the boundary conditions. I think that's a very promising area for extending or research and identification theories. The other part, I think, is to bring specific digital concepts into the research. And I think that is very promising because it can be an existing theory in IB, and I don't belong to IB, but from my interactions with the IB folks like Shaheer and Yedong over the last few years, what I have seen is there is tremendous opportunity to incorporate very unique aspects about digital infrastructure and technologies into some of these IB concepts, and that would help analyze and extend our understanding of the phenomena. So one related concept is how platforms, for example, the focus on internalization, more of externalization, how micro enterprises may use these platforms, global platforms, and how does the externalization theory apply? And I think these are things, if you think a little bit deeper, there are opportunities to, enrich. That's how I would think, enrich existing IB theories rather than just replacing them. But I think there is lots of opportunities to enrich those theories.
So much has already been said. And I agree with most of it. I think the question arises because we're always worried about kind of superimposing our theories in a new context and missing what's new about the new context. So I think we can apply the existing theories to new contexts, recognizing the boundary conditions that everybody mentioned. I think we're just going to go, since that has already been said, I'm going to mention one thing in favor of more and more qualitative studies, if you will. I do not do qualitative studies. I'm not very good at them, but I really love them because they articulate what is new about a context, and they kind of surface new constructs that can serve as an organizing, at least, framework that leads us to think about potential areas of theorization. I think we need more and more of that and transformation. Theories are, by definition, are supposed to be generalizable enough within boundary conditions if certain assumptions hold. So we should assume that they would work, and we should not overlook that. The question is, what are the boundary conditions, and under what condition we should go beyond that to existing new constructs, if you will. Thank you.
If I may just add one more, Minjung, before we go to this question. I think, related to that, earlier we talked about the societal impact of these technologies. I think that is another potential, because that doesn't, appear, they are not so evident in existing IB theories. So there is another opportunity to enhance existing theories from a societal impact. And I think there may be, this is not something which I am very familiar with, but there are lots of conceptual frameworks that are, in other disciplines or fields related to the impact on society and societal well-being and human well-being. I think those, if incorporated into IB, I think that would be another potential area.
All right, thank you so much. So our panelists has briefly touched upon some more like an empirical related issue in addition to more theoretical discussion. So data or the qualitative study. So I think it's the perfect time for us to move on to the empirical research related issues right now. So the next question that I would like to ask is, for all great research ideas, data availability or methods become major barriers, right? So I would like to ask if there are any databases you would like to recommend to scholars interested in this topic, or if there are any opportunities for methodological advancement in this research area.
So I'm going to start with the second question because I'm able to speak a little bit more about it than the databases. I think this is a great opportunity to do field work. We don't do as much of it as we used to. We have gone into the large scale databases, and I'm very fond of that, and we all do it. But I think field work, interviews, experiments, field experiments, more and more companies are actually struggling with the implementation of different facets of this concept. So I think that gives us a golden opportunity to actually do some experiments. I think that will be really interesting. I think that will enrich the discussion, and we're seeing it in different parts of the field. We're seeing multi method being used in the same study, so we can use combination of this to tease out our theoretical arguments and see if in fact we need to go beyond the theories that we do exist and under what conditions they hold and do not hold. Thank you.
So, just to add to what Shaka was saying, I'm also not aware of, public databases. I have seen in the Journal of Business Venturing, I have seen articles, manuscripts coming in which use data from streaming in retail outlets context. But I presume those are through access that specific researchers have got access to that data. These are typically Chinese firms. But I think in terms of quantitative data, you'll need to get good access to companies. But I second Shaka's point about qualitative, because many of these concepts and phenomena are unexplored and very preliminary. We don't have, and I think there is a very good opportunity to do qualitative studies and fieldwork. And I think that's probably more fruitful and even more likely to be successful in terms of getting journal acceptances, because I think there are lots of questions about the phenomena itself. So, if before we get ahead of ourselves and try to use quantitative data, we need to know what are the relevant research questions and how does the context inform those questions. And I think so those areas, I think qualitative work would be much more feasible and more valuable too.
Let me pick up on the thread of methodological improvements or focus in this space. I think it goes back to something that I mentioned earlier as well, is that this is an emerging phenomenon, sort of at the broad level, right? So when we're trying to make sense of significant new changes, and it's not fruitful given that we just go about applying an old theory and just sort of plug your empirical model and just test it and run with it. I think we, as scholars, we need to engage in a lot more of, Minnesota folks would recognize the Andy Vanderven tradition of doing engaged scholarship. And this could, certainly there's a lot of value to qualitative work, but it's not qualitative work for qualitative work's sake, right? So the goal of that qualitative work is to try to really understand what's going on. But I think even folks who do quantitative work can get a lot of advantage out of thinking about this as a more, it's an area that requires more engaged scholarship. In my digital-related empirical projects, I find that I'm spending a lot more time reading news articles or talking to a couple of companies, or really getting into the data and trying to understand, okay, what's going on here, right? And I think that that's one of the things that just methodologically we have to sort of drive towards. The other thing that I'll also say in terms of data sources, one of the things about the increasing digitization of the world is that there are lots of data sources that are becoming available. They already are available, and increasingly so, and also new ways of analyzing data that are becoming available, whether it is new ways of measuring using various kinds of text-based analysis, or even new ways of conducting analyses that are different from traditional regression and so on. And there are lots of opportunities to embrace those as well. But particularly on the data side, I mean, whether you pick something, I'm just going to mention one, like, think about GitHub, and I'm sure there's tons of opportunities to understand international business in the context of a global platform of digital technology development like GitHub, right? That's just one example, but there's like literally hundreds of these that you could consider.
Yeah, I'd like also to echo Deepak and say it's really not qualitative or quantitative. It's also about the state of the theory. Perhaps I'll even throw a provocation in here. A couple of years ago, we did a commentary in JIBS for the Decade Award, and there we included this 2x2 somewhere at the bottom of the page. And our provocation was that, with the development of databases and other things, one could also perhaps in the future to consider quantitative methods when we are when our goal is not just confirm but also explore. Now that comes. I'm not advising or recommending anyone to jump on data mining, particularly when it comes to the organizational data, because that's definitely not helpful. But I guess what we try to do in this commentary, we try to encourage our outlets, so journals, to make sure that we are open to all forms of methodological fit for empirical research, and B, we are very transparent around or about the requirements needed, to publish such, educating editors and reviewers on how to handle it. Because it's really not about qualitative and quantitative alone. It's also around the state of the theory and existing theory, and what is it you're trying to do? Do you want to explore, do you confirm? So I would say perhaps answer questions related to the context, the state of the theory, the research question, state of the theory development, research question before getting to the what is it I want to do. Having said that, I think the topic is so exciting and the conversations are so interesting, so we'll definitely support field research in whatever form, right? And I know if you guys like me study strategic transformation, it's very difficult to follow with the purpose of publishing, but it's extremely great to follow them in that process for the purpose of understanding what's going on and getting inspired for the research questions.
So yeah, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on the untucked database and also methodological related issues. And since we actually just have already like several more the prepared questions, but since we have only 30 minutes, around 30 minutes, so now I think we need to move on to the audience questions. We already have a series of really great, insightful questions, and we actually, me and Noman found a question raised by Somaya. That question is much really relevant to one of the questions that we prepared before. I think this is more about the IB specific question. So the question that I would like to share, pretty much really consistent with Klaus' question, is, so what are the challenges associated with conducting international and cross-cultural or the cross-national research? And because IB scholars need to study multinational companies, right? So a single companies who are conducting businesses in multinationals, or sometimes we need to compare different companies from different nations. So we would like to ask more about your insights about this multinational study context or the challenges. And specifically, as Klaus already mentioned, so are there any regulatory or the policy considerations regarding privacy or security related issues that businesses need to be aware of when implementing Industry 4.0 solutions, especially in a global context? Shaheer, you are muted.
I was about to say, Klaus always asks very good questions. They make you think. So in terms of policy, I think we hinted to some of these. We already talked about privacy issues, data sharing, all of this stuff. We also talk about access to technologies. We also talked about access to opportunities. And a lot of these things have to be thought out in terms of what are the policy implications and across different countries. In terms of the challenges IB scholars would face, I think there will be more or less extension of what we're already experiencing, correct? Understanding the context, understanding the underlying value system, the culture, the organization, the differences, correct? I think it will become. The problem is that the changes are happening rapidly, and there are surface types of changes that we will see, but the impact on culture, underlying value system, the way people interact, and I think Dana mentioned the implications for individuals, for example. I think that will change a lot more, but it's going to take time for it to happen. At least I think that will be really, really more profound than we realize, because organizations are going to change, and Satish talked about the way they will look into the work environment, and that will have a lot of implications, and that will happen differently across different countries, I think, and multinational companies will have to adapt to that. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think I'll talk a little bit about, I can comment on the policies and regulations, which Klaus, I did pose the question. I think at least there are three aspects of regulations that multinationals will need to be very, give a lot of consideration. One is access to digital infrastructures that Shaheer mentioned. We see that, one of the assumptions we make in, when we digital connectivity is that infrastructure is available all over the globe, whether it is cloud computing or other aspects of digital infrastructure, and that everybody has equal access. That's not very true. In many countries, these digital infrastructures are nationalized or in some way owned by state. And I think there are new curbs coming up and new barriers coming up. This goes back to the earlier point about more geopolitical fragmentation. So that is access to digital infrastructure. The other part is the cross-border data flow. Again, we assume that data can flow seamlessly across national borders, which is probably not very true. There are lots of regulations coming up in different countries, and they are not always consistent with one another, which again raises a very important question for a multinational. For example, a company like Unilever, which has presence in 120 odd countries. Suddenly you see that some countries you cannot, when you start moving data, there are restrictions. And so I think these that is another part. The third is the intellectual property rights are very, very varying when it comes to digital assets. And so that raises another set of challenges for multinationals. And these policies are also, the IP rights policies are not consistent across. In many places, when you come across IP rights on the digital side, they're not well defined. And so there is a lot of legal and other issues that come up. So I think in all these three things, we have to really think about what is actually going on in different parts of the world, what kind of barriers are coming up, and how do these policies and new policies and nationalistic regulations constrain the assumptions that we make about global connectivity, seamless data flow, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's a very, very interesting question from policy regulations and how it affects multinationals' operations, innovation, and all other aspects of their business.
So if I take it from here, I think for me, I always work with multinationals. What I'm curious about these days is the very source of competitive advantage. When in all my academic career, that notion that multinationals outperform domestic firms because they're able to tap into local knowledge, recombine it, utilize it, across all the subsidiaries. So that issue is, or that particular source, that advantage is no longer unique to multinationals, because with increasing digital connectivity that Satish just referred to, coupled with work from anywhere scheme that many domestic companies currently employing, plus the flexibility of incoming workforce, that they're not really socially glued to any organizational setup, rather to other contextual characteristics, plus integration, at least in some regions around labor markets. All this combined, we see some domestic firms who are able to tap into local knowledge in different countries, recombine and utilize it due to the digital connectivity, and apply in different parts of the world without they have a burden of being a multinational. All those bureaucracy structures and all the cultural, geographic differences and things like this. So I am very curious and very much encourage also our community perhaps to go back to the very core and understand why is it that multinationals cannot perform domestic firms, if whatever we discussed up till now is also available to domestic firms. So to Klaus's question, it's really not necessarily about what's happening in here and then let's transform it to the IB context, but maybe we need to go the other way around as well. I don't know if it makes any sense. Okay, I see some people nodding, that's good.
So I think the question that you posed at the outset, Minjung, is a really important question, in some ways quite profound for the IB field, because the founding premise of the IB field is that national boundaries matter, right? And I think that digital technologies and their widespread adoption are certainly at least changing in what ways national boundaries matter. So for example, today somebody sitting in we have this whole sort of generation of digital nomads, right? Somebody sitting in Costa Rica working in a job in Tokyo, right? And so this whole idea of national boundaries being something that defines a labor force, for example, and being able to control immigration and so on, that seems to be upended. But interestingly, we also live at the same time in a world where countries seem to be reasserting national boundaries and national policy and rejecting to some degree globalization. So there is a very interesting tension that sort of exists. I'm not making the case, by the way, that IB doesn't matter or that national boundaries don't matter. How they matter is undergoing some change, which is, I think, interesting in and of itself to kind of understand and explore. I also think that we have kind of a global infrastructure of institutions and laws and regulations that even not only at the regulatory level but also political institutions that are built on nation states, whereas we have a supercharging of global competition or global operation as a result of digital technologies and particularly communication technologies that allow companies to operate everywhere and provide services everywhere. So there's sort of a real potential for some types of regulation or national actions to then spread internationally, right? To actually have international impacts in various ways and maybe unexpected ways. I hesitate to do this, but I'll show one slide really quickly. So this is a paper that I'm still working on that's looking at the impacts of GDPR on scaling. And of course, GDPR is a set of policies that were implemented in the European Union, but our sample is US firms. And we're looking at US firms that operate in the EU and US firms that don't operate in the EU. And we do a bunch of things to match these firms and so on. So I won't get too much into the empirical details, but what we're seeing is a very significant decrease in scaling as a result of being exposed to GDPR, right? So the firms that are exposed to GDPR, almost a 40% decline or reduction in their scaling after GDPR comes into force. So it's these kinds of things that even in the policy domain, we may have insights to offer, that there's sort of effects of regulation or laws and so on that spill over across countries in ways that might not be fully anticipated when they're implemented.
All right, thank you so much. I'd like to discuss this issue, another question we received. So I'd like to ask your opinion about the novelty of research, because whenever we submit our papers to a journal, sometimes or often many times, reviewers say, what's new here, right? But as you know, there has been increasing number of submissions or even the conference submissions relating this topic. So I would like to ask our panelists about how you would evaluate whether a manuscript is substantially novel or only making an incremental contribution in this new context.
Wow, that's a very tough question. So since it's a tough question, I'm going to venture an answer, I guess. It's a matter of taste and a matter of judgment, correct? But actually, if it alters the way we see the question, alters the way we see the answer or the context, I would consider that to be a substantial contribution. If it simply extends what we know and say, well, this applies here, it does not apply here. It's the how and why, I think, that will determine if I see something as being more substantive than incremental. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I think and I think Shaheer is exactly right about how ultimately it does rely on judgment, right? It does rely on our judgment as scholars and sort of as reviewers and editors and so on. But it seems to be that the traditional metrics don't necessarily change. We're still looking at, what is the contribution to theory? What is the level of rigor at which the work is done? What is the contribution to relevance in the world we live in? I think that questions relating to digital technology automatically sort of seem to have some imprimatur of being relevant. But if there isn't a novel insight, as Shaheer mentioned, or if the work is not rigorously done so that it's not clear that what is claimed has actually been found, or that you can't generalize, it's, validity is sort of not generalizable. So those kinds of things come back. Those are traditional metrics. I don't think that they actually change that much. I think what does change is our judgment of, for a given work, how much is it moving the ball forward? And that's a social construction, I should say. It's something that we together as a field sort of figure out, right?
So I agree that, with both Shaheer and Deepak, that, in this, we talked about the idea that, these technologies create a context which has lots of, which is very, very evolving context. We don't know much about, what are the core questions and core ideas there. So to the extent that I think phenomenon-driven theorizing would be appropriate, at least in my view, because it provides more, throws more light on what is this phenomenon, how does it connect with what we already know, and how does it impact multinationals, in what kind of impact. So it might be emergent ideas, but I think at this stage of the concept itself, phenomena itself, that would be valuable. So obviously that is socially constructed, but I think from my perspective that would be novel, because it adds a lot of value for the next set of research that you can possibly do in that. But it also goes back to the question or issue that we discussed earlier, understanding the boundary conditions of existing theories. I think that is very important. How do Industry 4.0 technologies or the associated capabilities, how do they redefine some of these assumptions that we make in existing theories? I think, to me, that would be a very valuable contribution, because it allows us to, in future, to allow us to apply those theories in a much more appropriate way. So to me, that is also a novel contribution, although the theory itself may not be something which is new, but trying to bring more clarity to the underlying assumptions would be valuable.
Yeah, I very much agree, all of the above, and I don't think the notion of theoretical contribution change, so to say. I guess whether, if you just allow me a little bit of putting things into perspective. So if you, as a AIB and AOM are almost obliged to show, this is a mission of AOM, and you can see that, that pretty much stands for whatever else we do in theory. It is something about developing new theory, definitely, but also something that he just said, significantly challenging and perhaps enhancing existing theory. There will be lots of synthesizing, definitely, because lots of issues that we're going to deal in this space are interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary rather, and then they will definitely will be looking for crafting new ways to improve, the process of theory development. So definitely all of the above, and it is a greater call for novelty. Now, the issue of phenomenon-based theorizing, I believe, is particularly relevant. However, as IB scholar, we shouldn't forget about role of context, right? If there is a question mark around, for example, emerging market context. So this also stays. It's really not about taking existing theory and just happen to test in yet another context, but actually taking the context theory and contextualizing theories much more than just applying it to yet another context. So I agree. I mean, the very core of what constitutes a theoretical contribution and our focus on context remain.
May I just add one just comment to that, something that I was thinking about as everybody was talking, making connections across phenomena and theory, to me, new connections. An article that comes to my mind from AMR, in fact, by Chris Tucci, and it is not an IB article, Chris Tucci and Alan Afo, about crowdfunding, something that we all hear about, and something we all studied in our undergraduate program, probably the behavioral theory of the firm. So they think about, you think of crowdfunding as a way of getting money, correct, and trying to build the company, but they link it to it makes it as an instrument of organizational search and what it means for, broadening the scope of the search for the firm and all of the implications that come with that. I thought it was really, really insightful to take a new kind of issue that we all see and that you see it differently after you read the article, correct? That's what a Could Be does, and I think that will make for a novel contribution. You might have questions here and there, but ultimately say, wow, I really never thought about that connection. And it's meaningful because, that's what, that would be novel in my mind.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. And the next question is not really specifically IB context only. Of course, you can incorporate more thoughts about or the perspective from IB. But another question that I would like to share from our audience is when you talked about Industry 4.0 and digitalization, our main focus discussed so far was in the MNEs, multinational enterprises. Then what is the role of small, medium-sized enterprises in this context?
I'll try, since Yadong Lu and I wrote an editorial in JIBS, and we talk about this a little bit. That's why I'm taking a chance. And these companies are influential in the global, national and global economy. This is something we need to think about. Some of them are really multinational by definition, because they're working in multiple countries, as we know it. Now, going back to the question, some of these are actually the creators of the technology that make Industry 4.0. They are also the ones that adopt those technologies. They're an important part of the global supply chain, and in an incredible role. Without their participation, actually the global supply chain would collapse. In fact, and again, as we have seen, multinational companies kind of becoming more and more network type of organizations. They rely heavily on multiple networks of suppliers around the globe, and many of these are actually SMEs. So there is a lot of opportunities there to not only to study these companies. I think they deserve a lot more study than we actually do. I'm always kind of biased in that respect, I must admit, because I think a lot of the radical innovations come from these companies. Multinational companies seem to be able to absorb the innovations a lot better and commercialize them and scale them up. But a lot of the innovations come from these companies as well. And that is another reason why we should study them even more closely.
I will say that SMEs is a very broad category, as Shaheer was sort of highlighting, right? They do have a very large impact in terms of employment, in terms of just industrial activity. I think, and this reflects partly a personal bias, I'm really interested in digital SMEs, right? So if you think about digital first companies that are primarily sort of relying on digital business models, what is it that actually creates that boundary between SMEs and larger firms that might eventually become multinationals? I think there's an interesting set of questions in that interface to explore. I think traditionally a lot of SMEs, particularly, I mean, one of the interesting things to me, especially when you think about research on SMEs, is the sort of US-Europe divide, if you will. You hear about SME, in fact, probably the US versus the rest of the world. You hear about SMEs a lot more outside of the US, and not as much in the US, because it's kind of assumption seems to be somehow that everyone's trying to become big, everyone's trying to become as large as you can in the US. So it's just an SME is simply a stopping point on a journey to being a large firm. But I think that there's different drivers of SME, some of it having to do with personal or family sort of, especially with private firms, what ambitions or values or missions there are. But some of it has to do with the economics of the business and sort of conventional strategies about what advantage can you get from being large, from being a multinational, et cetera. So I think there's interesting questions there to explore, particularly in the digital context, as to what drives an SME to be an SME, right, as opposed to a much larger firm.
I think that those are very interesting questions. On the flip side, I think SMEs also have a lot of new risk in this digital world, and I think it's very interesting to study what kind of risks the SMEs are exposed to and how do they mitigate or manage those risks. One example is many small, especially digital SMEs, are able to use platforms to extend their reach. But there is, the articles by a couple of years back in AMP, there was a notion of platform-dependent entrepreneurs or platform-dependent entrepreneurship. I think some of these risks we have, Yadong and I have identified some of these risks in our recent work, but I think the broader context is we don't know what kind of risks some of these new technologies pose for smaller companies, especially when coming to AI and blockchain. These where data and access and connectivity becomes very important for their operations, and they don't have, there is power asymmetry between these large companies and the smaller enterprises, and I think these are all questions that become more important in the digital context than in the non-digital context. So I think a focus on the risk, the different types of risks that SMEs are exposed to and how they manage them would be something which is very valuable going forward.
I just do that I agree. I don't have an informed opinion about this because that's not my research area, but definitely more of the platform-based thinking, something that will bring SMEs forward. So pass, Minion. Next question.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Actually, I really sincerely hope that I can ask one more question, but because of the webinar related policy, maybe just we have to wrap up our discussion today here. But thank you so much for our panelists for sharing your great insights about Industry 4.0. And I strongly believe that those insights really help all of us to develop research ideas further and contribute to the literature. And I also really thank you all for your attending the webinar and also your great insightful questions. Your questions were really helpful to fertilize the scholarly conversation. So for those who ask questions or have questions but did not ask here, we would like to encourage to continue your conversation after the webinar. And last, I'd like to echo what Noman mentioned earlier at the beginning of the webinar. Please join the community, AOM IM division and AIB, where we could develop our research interest and thoughts together. So thank you so much again, and I really hope to see you all again in the future webinar and conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Pleasure. Thanks, Minjung. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Noman.